Now,
And you know what? Very similar to you, working on the documentary that I did recently for TG Cahill, we met so many women and couples who were hungry for more discussion around everything to do with fertility, to be honest. But in terms of this topic and not being recognised, it's huge. It really is huge, and it's something that there's a craving for from everyone. So you would have seen it yourself, like the interaction that we got in terms of making the documentary. And my own personal experiences, I've had 2 miscarriages, and I just felt that, I suppose part of it is being self-employed, that I had to get back to work straight away, and that it was kind of like, okay, get on with it, back to normal. And it didn't serve me well. It kind of came back to bite me later on, where I wasn't doing so well in myself. And I realized that I didn't take time out for me. Not that it's kind of a case of you get a set amount of days and then you like tick that box of grief and you're over it. It's not that, but at least if you had space and time,
yeah,
it would just help. But I think the acknowledgement in itself would really help with the grieving process. And as you said, there's so many different facets to this, from people who are going through fertility treatments to somebody like me who's experienced miscarriage or whatever it is. But to be given time and to be recognised is huge. So fingers, toes and everything crossed.
Well, we're hopeful we'll get cross-party support for the bill, because as you say, what we're hearing from everyone, just as you've said, is the need for acknowledgement and recognition in the workplace, and some way of, it may see, I hesitate to use the word tokenistic, because I think people need the time of leave, and I think paid leave is a really important right for women and workers, but it is also important just symbolically to recognise and acknowledge the trauma and the bereavement that people have suffered, and that's really what we're aiming to do with this bill. So I know we have other people. You're all very welcome. I know I'm talking here with Síle Seoige, as everyone will know. Síle's very well known television presenter, broadcaster, all around icon, who I've been a fan of for many years, and we've just discussed our mutual appreciation. So we're thrilled to have you with us, Síle, to talk about this very serious topic, and to talk about the bill that we're putting forward for Labour, that I'll be introducing in the Seanad next Monday evening at 7:30 p.m, and to thank everyone who's come out and supported us on it. It's a bill that's had a long preparation period. I've been working for some years now, actually, with the Irish National Teachers Organisation, the INTO, and in particular with Councillor Alison Gilliland, who came to me 2 years ago and said the members of her organisation, the Teachers Organisation, many of them had come to her, particularly women, saying that they had real difficulty coping in the workplace with the aftermath of an early miscarriage, or indeed with dealing with IVF treatment in successive rounds, that they didn't feel they could speak with their principal or their employer, and that they were taking holidays or sick leave. So, at that point, we felt there was a gap here, that women in particular needed to have acknowledgement in the workplace where they were going through an early miscarriage, or where they were needing time out for IVF, and that we needed to provide paid leave. We published our bill at the start of March, just to do precisely this, to provide for a period of days of leave, for paid leave for those who have to take time off for IVF treatment or for early miscarriage. And in fact, in late March, the Labour Party of New Zealand introduced a similar legislation. So clearly there is a confluence. This is time. And next Monday night in the Seanad or Senate, we will be debating the bill, and we're very hopeful we'll get government support so that we'll pass to the next stage and we will move towards bringing it into law. So look, we're here with very grateful to have Síle Seoige joining us. We will also have Clodagh, who I think is on, and Claire Cullen Delsol of the Termination for Medical Reasons group and the charity LMC Bereavement Support. And Síle, I might start with you while I'm just checking that I have admitted the others on my Insta. And Síle, maybe you'll just tell us a little. You've been so brave and so courageous to come forward about your own experience, and I know how helpful it's been, particularly the documentary did, which was so powerful. So you might, if you're comfortable, just to say a little about your own experience.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. So I'm 42 now. I have a little boy who'll be 4 in August, and we would love to add to our family, but unfortunately we haven't had joy so far. My first pregnancy resulted in my little boy. Everything went fine. I was pregnant again, and unfortunately I experienced a missed miscarriage, a term I hadn't even heard before, but effectively it's where your baby has stopped growing, but you're not miscarrying in the normal way, in the typical way, which is that you're bleeding. So I found the news out and I went straight back to work. And I remember just 2 days, I think it was 2 or 3 days after hearing the devastating news that like my baby stopped growing, I was on stage in a sparkly dress emceeing an event. And the only reason I say that is, I suppose it's a reflection of, regardless of what we do for a living, we never know what's going on in people's lives. And a lot of people are carrying a lot, you know, they're dealing with a lot. And we often don't have a clue. And if you scratch beneath the surface, you know. So anyway, that night I obviously went into kind of my professional mode of delivering what I could. I felt a little bit out of body that night because I was a little paranoid that I was going to start to bleed. And I remember thinking, this is wrong. This is weird. But being freelance, being self-employed, I felt I had no choice but to do the gig. And literally, unless my leg was hanging off, I would never cancel a gig. It's in my nature. I've been doing this 23 years and I just feel like I can't cancel a gig. And because I also don't have necessarily permission to do so, as in when I went through it, that it was a case of, well, nobody knew about it except my close unit. So I went back to work. Anyway, I was pregnant again after that, an extremely similar situation where once again, I felt like I had to go back to work. I had D&Cs both times simply because I wasn't miscarrying in the typical way. So yeah, I went straight back to work, but it took its toll. And I remember after the second one in particular, a number of months later, I really felt the emotional impact of it, where I was basically very ratty with everyone. I didn't know why, but it was unresolved grief. I didn't allow myself time to really deal with it. So to be honest, working on the documentary, that's still available, by the way, if people want to view it, it's on the Clodagh player. Thankfully, it'll be there for a long time, because we know this is a really important piece of television, reflecting people's experiences of miscarriage, and they are so varied. But that really helped me personally process it, but also listening to people, feeling less alone. But this is not something that, I think at the time you're going through it, you feel like you're the only woman in the world, or the only person in the world going through this. But you realise that it's extremely common, and we need to normalise the conversation around it and help and empower and support each other. So, you know, that's why this is, I feel the timing is right. It's much needed, but I also really admire the work of you and your team pushing ahead on this, because, you know, women and couples deserve this. We really do.
Yeah, I think you're right. And thank you for speaking so honestly about your own experience, Sheila. I think, as you say, it really does help others. And it's been really, you know, so poignant, I have found it, to hear and to read so many stories, so many people who've come to us with similar experiences and talked about the real trauma of trying to go back to work. I mean, your description of being on stage in a glittery dress, you know, and having to just process it without feeling you have permission to talk in your workplace about it. That's really what people are doing.
Exactly.
You know, it's a culture of silence, unfortunately, around miscarriage. I mean, in legislation, late miscarriage does qualify for a leave, of course, maternity leave, but it's early miscarriage before the 24th week, and it's IVF treatment and having to take time off rounds of IVF treatment that currently has no formal recognition in law, and that's what we're trying to do in this bill. And it's your own experience of not being able to deal with it. In the upfront way that it should be dealt with. I don't know if you've heard some of the Joe Duffy comments, but people have talked to me about women going through menopause. It's the same silence that's out there around it, and similarly, we need to try and address that taboo. You probably also, Sheila, you know, the period justice and period poverty movements, which again are trying to talk about ensuring that there's less of a taboo. What do you think? I mean, why do you think there's such a taboo? I've just been really struck by this, particularly in recent weeks, you know.
I think anything to do with the female reproductive system in Ireland, we have, I mean, I think it goes back generations, and without wanting to bring religion into it, I do think the church has played a huge part in this. Yeah. And this conditioned thinking around, we just don't talk about it. We don't talk about how we get pregnant. We certainly don't talk about losing babies. We don't talk about menstrual cycles. We don't talk about anything to do with ovaries or the womb. No, we don't go there. And I do think, really, from listening to women of various different ages and listening to what they heard growing up and what was the norm and what we have been conditioned to think as the norm, which was, no, we just don't talk about that. You keep it to yourself. And there is a veil of secrecy, as you said, surrounding pregnancy. The whole, we don't talk about it until we get to at least the 12 weeks until we get through the first trimester. But when you really kind of, pull back the layers of that, it's to do with the likelihood of miscarriage happening is in those early weeks. So if you haven't said it to anyone, well, then we don't have to go there. We don't have to have that conversation. But that doesn't actually help anyone or serve you at all. I certainly think that the time is now to blast open all these conversations in a very healthy way that empowers people to feel like when you talk about female reproductive issues, you have fibroids, you have endometriosis, you have so many different issues that women have to take time off work. They say that they're, off for sick reasons or taking their holiday simply to do with, having procedures or having treatments that are absolutely necessary for their health, but they don't feel they're comfortable enough to tell their employer or have these conversations because there's a huge amount of shame, secrecy, and it's very destructive. It's hugely, hugely destructive. And I just think enough now.
Yeah, you're so right. And I do agree with you about a religious culture that has seen women's bodies as somehow distasteful. And I use that word. It's a strong word, but I think unfortunately that is the culture we've all grown up in. And I mean, I was very conscious. I've had two daughters, and I'm lucky, I didn't suffer miscarriages. But at the time when I was pregnant, my girls, there is this strangeness about pregnancy in Ireland, isn't there? And of course, that was at a time when the 8th Amendment was still in place in the Constitution, when there was still this reluctance. You would feel it. You may have experienced, and I'm sure many women listening will be aware of it, a kind of a reluctance around doctors and men to address any issues around the pregnancy for fear that something you might then want to terminate your pregnancy. It was a very odd feeling, and I think that feeds some of this taboo and this culture of secrecy that we've talked about, and that so many women have shared who've got in touch with us since we published the bill and in anticipation of the debate. So we really want people to hear that, to hear the experiences. We had also hoped to have Claire, Cullen, Delsol from LMC Bereavement Support. I think you're both on. I think we have.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Hello, sorry about that, Claire.
No problem.
I think it's something with my system, so apologies about that.
No, you're fine. I was really enjoying that chat anyway. I was listening and nodding away here the whole time.
So. Claire, again, just to thank you very much for coming along. This is Claire Cullen Delsol from the LMC Bereavement Support Charity, which I know is connected with the Termination for Medical Reasons group. And I just want to give a big shout out to everyone in TFMR, because we worked so closely with you all in the Repeal the 8th campaign that Síle and I have just been discussing, and that did so much itself to break the taboo around fertility and pregnancy in women's bodies. So Claire, you've shared again your own story of your personal experience, and maybe you'd like to share it with us in the context of the bill we're discussing tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much. I mean, I really, we've come so far that we're being included in discussions like this. It's amazing. I mean, even 5 years ago, I don't think we would have been invited along to discuss mainstream pregnancy loss. So now the fact that we are included in these conversations means a huge amount. And I know that all the ladies from TFMR and from LMC are watching, and they are delighted that we get to have our say in this as well, because I suppose we are part of mainstream pregnancy loss, but also there are unique complications with the kinds of pregnancy loss that we represent. And of course, you have been a massive support to TFMR since the very beginning. So I think you deserve all the credit for that as well. And I know that the ladies did say, make sure you thank Ivana when you're talking to her, Senator.
No titles here, but seriously, the TFMR were incredible. I mean, we just... I remember being in tears so many times at different couples, different individuals coming forward to tell their absolutely devastating stories of having that tragic diagnosis in a wanted pregnancy, and then having nowhere to turn and not being able. And that really, I think, was one of the huge catalysts that changed public opinion around in the run up to the repeal. So just a big shout out back to you all.
Thank you. Well, I suppose, from our point of view, we told all our stories, and lots of people went public and shared really, really deep pain in order to affect that change. And I don't think the change has really had the impact on us that people may think it has. We're still travelling, most of us, most of our members still can't access abortion care here. So it is something to bear in mind when that legislation review comes up later on this year.
Absolutely.
But I suppose...
Yeah, and review period is underway now. It's so important that those who fought so hard to get the legislation through ensure not only that we defend the gains we made in 2018, but actually that we build on that and look at how we can make the legislation better. You know, removing the 3-day period, ensure that those who aren't covered currently can be brought within it. Sorry. So yes, thank you. We hear you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, totally agree. And I suppose, like, from our point of view, we are choice-based, we're non-directive, and we support people who are facing ending a wanted pregnancy for medical reasons. But the one directive that we do give, and that part of our policy, is to recommend that women try to take time off work. It is the one thing that we will actually say to someone, this is something you should do. We don't normally say you should do anything to any woman and any couple, any family that calls in. The one thing is you should try and take time off. And what's heartbreaking is so many of them just don't feel that it is a possibility. And in an awful lot of cases, if you get a diagnosis, for example, I'll go back to the beginning. So you start trying for a pregnancy. Again, our members are no different to any other family. They're often, they require assistance. They require fertility treatment. And they have the same issues as other people. They've taken sick days. Often they've taken holiday days. And then finally they're pregnant. And as the pregnancy progresses, something is wrong. Something goes wrong somewhere and is discovered at a scan or in some other way. And that requires more testing and more time off. And antenatal care is covered under your normal employment leave, but your partner or the baby's dad isn't covered. And that's where it can often fall in the cracks. And the partners aren't treated equally in that. And that's the very start of a journey where men and women are treated differently once they become parents. And that carries on through life, and that carries on through our entire world and our entire structure of how society works at the moment. But in fairness, it is really important that when people can take that leave, when they can take that time off, that it's both partners that can do it equally, so that it's not just all left to one person to carry the can. And obviously at the moment, that's a really big issue, that people aren't able to even access their own babies' testing. That they aren't. I had a couple last week where a man was asked to wait outside when they went to get their baby's postmortem results. He was there for his own daughter's postmortem results, not as a partner, but as a dad. But I think one of the most important things then is that during that time, that period of testing, that they can access paid statutory leave that isn't sick leave and that isn't time off, like annual leave. Then obviously we have the idea that people, when they are accessing a termination to end a pregnancy, it's much longer than a usual end of a pregnancy, and typically it occurs a lot later as well. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is that while people may be able to take the time off, they often have to go back to work straight away after. We've had plenty of dads who will get off a ferry, drive home and go to work the next morning. Often women will go back to work within 1 or 2 days. It has a massive impact on their mental health. It has a huge impact on their recovery. It's really detrimental. And one of the other issues then that we're looking at is that they don't want to tell people what they did. They don't want to talk about why they've left the country. They don't want to talk about what's happened. So sometimes they don't even tell their employers that they've lost a baby or that they were ever pregnant at all. And often they're afraid what their GP would put on the cert if they do try to take sick leave. So they can't take that time off either. Or it will use up their sick days. If you've got a company where there's rolling sick days and that, you can only take so many for over a 4-year period, it can be a real issue. And one, I think, of the most heartbreaking points that somebody brought up to me yesterday was that sometimes when a woman finds out that she is facing a termination for medical reasons, she'll delay that process in order to be able to access maternity leave, carrying a baby that she knows is dying for weeks at a time, tortured, just so that she knows she'll have time at the other side to recover and to grieve. And to me, that just sounds like...
Yeah.
Like, it really is barbaric. And it's so ironic what you were saying about the 8th Amendment, because that equated a pregnancy to the life of a woman. And yet we were legally holding these two things as equal. And at no point did we ever give consideration to allowing for leave to grieve when one of those people died. Like, it makes no sense. The contradiction and the hypocrisy of it just doesn't work. And it needs to change. And I'm so delighted that somebody's bringing this bill in and that is going to affect the change.
Well, look, thank you so much for that, Claire. You know, as you say, it was always, to me, deeply ironic how little regard there was for women and partners who were going through this pain and trauma. And we know how many. I mean, you know, the stories, as you say, so many pregnancies end in miscarriage, about 14,000 a year in Ireland, and so many people have that devastating diagnosis of you've described of fatal fetal abnormality, and these were and yet, you know, so little was being done. Now with repeal, we do have obviously legislation now on termination of pregnancy, but what we don't yet have is what we're seeking to do, which is the formal legal recognition that people need time if they've suffered this bereavement. And I suppose the other thing to say before I go on, I know Clodagh O'Hagan is also with us, and we're going to bring her in now, but just the other thing to say, which you brought up there, Claire, is, you know, that so many people had to take sick leave and are still taking sick leave where they've suffered early miscarriage, or indeed where they've had to take time off for IVF or fertility treatment, and or have had a termination. And in those, you know, and that's not sickness. And this was a battle that feminists fought actually in the 70s and 80s. That pregnancy and maternity and fertility are not sickness. Women get sick like men, and we get sick leave if we get sick. But pregnancy is a different thing. And just as we now recognise that, and in fact, European directives recognise that maternity leave is different to sick leave. You don't take sick leave if you're pregnant, you know. And so similarly we should say, well, you know, miscarriage is not sickness in the same way. It's something that specifically affects, that is unique to women, just as IVF treatment is not sickness, you know, whether it's for women or men. So I think these are important political and messages that we should be sending out, and that's another reason for bringing in legislation like this. So thank you so much for that. I want to bring in Clodagh O'Hagan. We're really grateful to Clodagh for attending. She's a PR who works with Vodafone Ireland and who's spoken a different... Hi Clodagh, how are you?
Hello, how are you? We finally got here.
You got here, but thank you for joining us. We really
Not at all.
Just as we really appreciate Síle and Claire being with us tonight as well. I mean, we wanted to do this really to just give an outlet for people to share experiences, both bad and good, both positive and negative, you know, because we're trying to learn from those experiences as we bring forward this legislation seeking to provide paid reproductive health leave, as we're calling it. So Clodagh, you might want to speak. You've spoken publicly about your own journey into, as you call it, I think, solo motherhood, which you might talk a little about that.
Yeah, no problem at all. And God, just listening to everybody before me, I you know, every day I kind of realize how lucky I am to have my little boy. But even, I suppose, until we started having this conversation, I didn't really think about how lucky I was, even in my experience and work leading up to it. So just by way of background, when I was 41, I made the decision to have a baby on my own following some routine blood tests with the doctor. And I suppose the chat with her around my age and my statistics was that, you know, time wasn't on my side. And if it's something that I really wanted, I should consider doing that then. And while it had been something I had considered in the back of my mind for maybe a couple of years up to then, it wasn't like, you know, something I, you know, top of my list. I know what I want to do. I want to have a baby on my own. But I suppose when it was put in front of me that it might not happen, you know, I took the decision then to just go for it. So it was a joyous moment, but, you know, it's bittersweet because it's not how you think you're going to have a baby. So that in itself was, I think, the start of an emotional roller coaster. And that happened in September when I was on holidays. When I started the process and when I had my first appointment in a fertility clinic just before Christmas, when the chat that I had with them, they told me the harsh realities around the statistics of me having a baby on my own and the likelihood of me getting pregnant. And it was something like 3% chance of it happening, you know, without any kind of medical assistance, 5 to 7% chance of happening with follically assisted IUI, and only 7% chance with the IVF. So for me, I kind of had used all of the adrenaline, geared myself up to finally doing it on my own. And then having that conversation was absolutely devastating to hear that, oh my God, I've made the decision and it might not actually happen. So it was just before Christmas and I kind of fell apart for a little bit, you know, and had to collect myself, come back to it, and made a plan of what my treatment plan was going to be and started the following March, April. That again, it was great. But, you know, I think I was actually very lucky in that I probably only had treatment for maybe 6 months. But even with that, I started my treatment 3 times. I only completed it one time in my third go, and I was successful and very successful. I'm very lucky in getting pregnant and having it. Thank you very much. And now I have my little baby Frank, who is actually 1 on Saturday.
Oh, gorgeous.
but
having said to him,
yeah, thanks so much. But you know, over that time, you know, my team was very much aware of my fertility journey from the very beginning, and that was fantastic for me, especially because I was doing it on my own. I really needed that support on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, after going into the fertility clinic and hearing the lows, and I really kind of had my cheerleaders within work in terms of, like, you know, helping me, you know, going into work. And as you know, you spend so much time in work, they're your work family. And for me to be able to speak so openly and feel supported was phenomenal. And then even during the actual treatment, you know, you're starting it, you're doing injections every day, you're absolutely knackered. Some days you just want to take to the bed. And I was very lucky. I was like, I'm under the duvet, I'm not coming in. And there was no questions asked. There was never any pressure. And I never felt there was a need that I had to kind of, you know, struggle or struggle through to make it in. And then during my second round of treatment, just a couple of days before the insemination was due to happen, my eggs collapsed, or the follicles collapsed. Yeah. And that was absolutely devastating for me. And I know other people going through fertility treatments, you know, experience far worse. But for me, every month was a month closer to, every month was a month older. And every month was like, okay, maybe this won't happen. And you kind of lose the faith that it's actually going to work out for you. And I remember at that time, actually, another friend at work saying to me, you know, she had so many friends and they'd all been through their own fertility journey and with different challenges, but they all had their babies now. And that kind of, you know, gave me support. But during those challenging times and during the time when I went in for the treatment, and, you know, day by day, I'm counting, you know, is it day 1, is it day 2, and you're feeling nauseous. It was great to not have to hide it or go into work and have a brave face and, you know, being like, oh, everything's okay, and waiting for, you know, the 14 days before I got the actual positive result, or the 12-week landmark, you know, where you're allowed to tell people, or the times after that. So I was incredibly lucky because it was such a nerve-wracking time, and each day kind of felt like a lifetime, you know, worrying, like, was it going to continue and what the next step was. So, you know, thankfully, I'm so grateful that, like I say, it all worked out. And when I think back now and hearing what everyone has to say, you know, I'm incredibly lucky to work for an employer like Vodafone, who are very supportive of people within the workplace, even in terms of their maternity policies and flexible working and onboarding when you go back to work after having a baby. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Clodagh. And we thought it was important to share with everyone tonight, not just the negative experiences, not just the, you know, how hard it is to go through the marriage. It's very important that we share those stories, but also share a good practice story about an employer that where this is dealt with well, where there isn't the silence that Síle and I were discussing earlier, and that Claire and I were discussing. So that's really positive to hear that was your experience. And at the same time, I think it's also really important that you've spoken so honestly about your fertility journey, about the rigorous regime. Anyone I know who's gone through the rigorous regime, that's what I always think it sounds like.
It is I basically had 2 full-time jobs for that 6-month process. Absolutely. You know, every day, what you're eating, your acupuncture, all of kind of the ancillary treatments that you do around it. It's very much a full-time occupation, but it's totally worth it.
Absolutely, you know, but an enormous thing to take on, I think, is when, as you say, you're also working an ordinary job and dealing with normal life too. And again, that's the reason why in this bill we've put in for time off for reproductive health treatment. So not just for early miscarriage, although that's a huge important part, but also that people would have a right to paid time off for IVF treatment. Because we're so conscious that this is a real issue for so many people going through the same sort of fertility journey. In some cases, successive rounds of failed IVF treatment. I mean, really traumatic experiences. And of course, often coupled with miscarriages.
Exactly.
with it.
And I also feel very strongly that your environment and how you're feeling and your wellness, can play a significant part, as part of your overall fertility journey. So, if you're lucky enough to be supported and cushioned and, not to have that kind of extra stress in the back of your mind and know that you can kind of offer it all up for it, I think that can only be beneficial if you're going through the process.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It just helps general health, your general health. And that's, again, a key reason why, why we need to put forward legislation like this.
100%.
That symbolic importance, that it names this, that it empowers people to speak out about their experience and not to feel there's any taboo anymore on it. So thank you so much, Clodagh, for sharing.
Not at all. Thank you for having me, and well done.
And it's great to hear about a positive employer and a positive employment experience. Clodagh, if you want to leave, I'm going to bring Síle back in, maybe just for the last word, if that's okay. And
no problem. Thanks so much.
And thank Claire again. Síle, we'll bring you back in. Just wanted to ask Síle just your response, hearing that positive experience of an employer where miscarriage and reproductive health treatment was spoken about openly. And I just thought it was such a contrast to your eloquent description earlier of that, of just having to hide it and going back out literally on stage without having had that time to process the grief or the trauma. So I wonder, do you want to say how you felt hearing Clodagh describe that positive and supportive work environment she had?
It's so great to hear the positive, because often we hear the negative stories, don't we? Yeah. So it's important to reflect that, it can be a very supportive experience too. And I mean, Clodagh is wonderful, I think, for his number one, going solo and doing it her way, which is really inspiring, but also speaking about it openly, that will empower so many other people as well. And I think we can all learn from this. It doesn't have to be, a really negative experience. And what she said there about your wellness and your well-being and giving yourself time, and listening to Claire speak as well, what they were both saying really resonated with me, is that, time is of huge value. It doesn't mean that you magic away the problem or the issue, whatever that is that you're personally going through, but giving yourself space and time to just sit with however you're feeling is going to pay dividends. So in terms of your performance in a workplace, then down the line, you're going to be more productive, you're going to be more present, you're just going to be a better in what you do if you've given yourself that pocket of time to acknowledge how you're feeling and to heal, because obviously it can impact you physically, mentally and emotionally, and often it's a combination of all those things. So yeah, I mean, I'm always learning. I think with this topic in particular, there's always new information, there's new experiences that we're hearing about, and I think it's about listening with an open heart and really just listening to people's experiences and having compassion, that it's not a one size fits all. Everybody has their own experience of this time. And while some people have this kind of assumption sometimes that it's an early miscarriage, well, it was early, in a way you should be okay. But I have spoken to so many women and couples who have had different types of experience of miscarriage, who say, one woman in particular who had a second trimester loss and an early miscarriage, and she said to me that she struggled more with the early loss, because when she lost her baby in the second trimester, that baby was acknowledged because everybody knew she was pregnant and they got to bury their baby. But the early trimester loss, she felt that because people didn't know, and she struggled to process her grief. So I think once you pee on that stick as a woman and you see that you're pregnant, you instantly imagine a life with this new little being in it. So it's devastating at whatever level. And we need to honour that while one woman will feel a certain way, another will feel completely differently. And it's just not the same for everyone. But it's great to hear that there are positive experiences alongside the negatives. And let's hope there are more and more positive experiences going forward, because miscarriage is not going to go away either. It's a common, normal part of life. It is nature. It does happen, and we need to normalise the conversation around it. There's no shame, there's no guilt, you didn't do anything wrong, it's not your fault. Unfortunately, it happens. You could be doing all the right things, taking all the right supplements known to man. doing everything right, and it can still happen. So, we just need to get okay with it. And by having these chats, you're moving it ahead more and more all the time. So I think we'll all be with you in spirit. Is it next week? The 24th, isn't it?
It's next Monday night, the 24th.
Next Monday.
30 in the Shannon. We have a 2-hour debate schedule. Yeah. I think it will be an important debate. We're hopeful we'll get government support, but we are asking everyone who's tuned in to lobby their government senators, any senators in Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens, to ask them to support the bill, not to block it going through to the next stage. We want to work with government, getting bills through and getting them passed into law through working with governments, successive governments. And I think this is one issue that is a cross-party issue. I've had women colleagues from all parties and none who've spoken about their own experiences privately with me and who've spoken about them publicly. And it's a crossover issue. It's so important, as you say, Síle. It is, and I think you were quite right to finish there. People shouldn't feel shame or guilt or taboo. This is a natural life, as we said. 1 in 5 pregnancies in Ireland ends in miscarriage. Many people have trouble getting pregnant in the first place and have to go through death. And all of this should be acknowledged and should be recognised in our law and in our workplaces, and that's what we're seeking to do. I do want to say just a huge thank you. I know we're coming out of time, so I want to say a huge thank you, Síle, to you, to Síle Seoige, to yourself, just for coming in and coming along and talking so openly with us tonight. I also want to thank very much Clodagh O'Hagan and Claire Cullen Delsol from TFMR. Thank you so much. You've all shared different experiences and very different reflections, but it's so important to learn from all of your own views and experiences. And I do, just a few other issues that I suppose this debate has also generated for us. One, a few of you I know on the chat are talking about just generally the treatment of pregnant women. That's obviously been an issue during the pandemic as well. And a shout out to Linda Kelly, who's been really pushing for women to get out of their partners present for childbirth and labour. That's so important, and for antenatal appointments. That's been a big issue. I've also been meeting since we published the bill with parents of children people who've experienced stillbirth, and again early stillbirth not recognised. And I'm just interested to hear your comment on that, Síle. You're quite right. Others have shared that experience with an early miscarriage and a stillbirth before 24 weeks. That's particularly traumatic because there's no recognition in law. So again, we want to look at how that can be done, how we can recognise that in law. I do want to finish by thanking very much the Irish National Teachers Organisation, the INTO, and Councillor Alison Gilliland, who really prompted this legislation by coming to me 2 years ago and telling me about the experiences so many teachers were having where they couldn't speak in their workplace, where they were having to take sick leave and so on. And so that's what prompted us to begin work on the bill that has now come to this point where we're bringing it into the Shannon. And I particularly want to thank my wonderful assistant Chloe Manahan, who is organised tonight, and Katie Deegan in the Labour digital sphere, who have set this up. Thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for coming along and for joining us tonight. Do tune in. You can watch the Shannon live. Not many people do, but you can on Oireachtas Live next Monday night at 7:30 when we'll be debating this bill. Do watch Sheila's very documentary on miscarriage. Síle, as you said, it's on the TG Cahir player, I think. And we'll
exactly, thank you. And I think, the messages, one of the ones that reflects what I'm getting a lot is, I was nervous about watching it, but I'm so glad I did. So I think some people who have gone through miscarriage are worried it'll be overly triggering. There's no doubt about it. It's an emotional watch. It is raw at times, but I think a lot of people have got a lot of comfort from watching it as well. So if you're struggling and you're unable maybe to explore it, I think take a step out of your comfort zone and see what you think, because I actually think it'll help you. It's just that I've been getting a lot of those messages, which are quite interesting. I didn't want to watch it, but I'm so glad I did. So it's a great piece of work made by Tyrone Productions, a great production company, and it's available on the player, and it will be up there for a long time, which is great. So check it out on the TGR player. It's called Jeddah Tuchta, which effectively means end the silence, which is again what it's all about. Yeah.
I love your Irish. I wish my Irish was, I had the bloss, but that's one. And it's a very powerful watch, just to echo that. And just to thank you again, Síle, to thank Clodagh O'Hagan for speaking about her very positive experience with employer, Vodafone in her case, who were willing to acknowledge what she was going through in her own fertility journey. Thank you so much for your honesty in speaking about that. And thank you so much also to Claire Cullen Delsol from TFMR Ireland, and keep up the great work that you are doing, all of you. In that wonderful group, Termination for Medical Reasons. It's been so supportive for so many women and couples going through dreadful times in difficult crisis pregnancies. Thank you all again, and please do support our bill. We'll be sending emails around about that, and we'll be hopefully seeing it go through on Monday night into the next stage, and we'll then be working with government, we hope, to bring it into being. Thank you again. Good night.
Good night. The very best of luck.
Thank you all.